Okay, maybe we can make a start. For tonight, at the end of the class here in Westport, we're going to just get one student to give us her business communications oral presentation for about 10 minutes or so. So you guys would be very welcome if you want to listen to that, but otherwise, to that extent, we'll probably finish a little bit early. All right? Handle that? Nifika, I think you've just come in. I just reinforce the fact now that you should have with you number 5, segmentation, targeting and positioning, I think it's called. Yep. And the next assessment, which is covering last week's one, number 4, biobehaviour, and this week's one, the targeting and segmentation. So you're getting it in effect a wee bit in advance because you won't have done part of it just yet. So the topic for tonight starts off with segmentation is the first concept we talk about, and essentially that is saying a part of a total market segment. And what the sort of thing we'll be talking about is how big the segments can be, and if you have a particular product or service, what potential segment of the total market might it be relevant for. And we'll look at that. They are called so-called segmentation variables, how you cut up the pie into segments, and what criteria you use. Like if you're cutting up a pie, you might say, well, we want exactly a 16th of the pie or something like that. That would be a form of segmentation where you're just dividing a total market by a number for no other reason. But actually it does obviously get a bit more complicated than that. Now on the screen we have the 2 drink products, the Coca-Cola and the Taittinger champagne. And so what are the differences between those two, top of your head?
One's alcohol, one's not.
One's alcoholic and one's not.
One's aimed at adults and one's aimed at teenagers, younger people, perhaps?
Certainly partly, and if we argued that young adults and older adults perhaps go for the Taittinger, what then do we need to say though? Would it be all older people?
Only fancy people drink champagne, don't they?
And so what determines that? Income. I don't know exactly, but Taittinger in New Zealand is probably well over $200 a bottle, I think. It's fairly expensive. And so the other thing, just to sort of use this as a little bit of an illustration, that the sales for Coca-Cola worldwide, and somebody's going to ask me, is this per day or per year? I think it's per year. It's $35 billion. So it's 119 million. And the sales for the Taittinger, even although it is expensive, are 151 million. So one of the first things you can say is that the Coca-Cola is potentially for a mass market. So it could be anything ranging from a kid about 5-year-old up to an older adult that sort of drinks it from thirst or something like that. Coca-Cola used to have an ad at one time for the pause that refreshes. And that was when there were a whole lot of vending machines for Coke and you were supposed to pause, take a bottle of Coke and refresh it. The other thing is, so first of all, the bottle of Coke is vastly cheaper than the bottle of champagne. It is sold to vastly more people, and the champagne, on the other hand, is sold to a limited number of people, a niche, and very high priced. And that just lets us think of two terms then. You can talk about a mass market, which doesn't distinguish too much about the type of people, and the niche market, which, top of our heads, would be a niche for two reasons: limited use, and a niche could also be because it's very costly and only a small number of people could afford it. So if you compared that with the bottle of champagne where it was on the left, it was on the right, and the bottle of Coke that was on the left, which way round are those two cars? In other words, is the one that's not coloured, is that equivalent to a bottle of Coke or not?
Not.
No.
Looks like a collectible. It's the other one looks like an everyday car.
The one on the left is one of the earliest Model T Fords, and the one on the right is a Cadillac. And one of the differences about it in those early days was the Model T Ford was one of the first products made that used mass production. And so mass production meant that they would basically run the whole thing down a production line. So a few bits of steel would be welded together for the chassis, and then the body parts would come, and they put the wheels on, all going down a line, each person doing a little bit of a job. And that was shown to massively speed up production of a thing like a car, and the Model T became, in effect, the people's car. For the first time ever, many people could afford to buy a car. And some of the things about it were vaguely interesting. You could have any colour but black. We're not going to muck around with different colours and changing the thing. And they did a few other things, like, excuse me, one of the things that the car had on it, and I think it was probably the front mudguards, stuff in those days tended to come packed in big wooden crates, and they sent a instruction to the people that supplied the mudguards that said, we would like you to pack them in a wooden crate, and they gave them the exact measurements of the crate, the length, the height and the width. And after a while somebody bothered to ask them, why are you doing that? Because the old mudguards rattle around in this crate a bit. And the answer was, the sides of the crate became the floorboards in the front and the back.
Oh, that was smart.
None of you are old enough to remember these older cars, like I can just remember that they had wooden floorboards in them.
Oh.
Yeah. And then they usually had mats on top of them. So that was the old Model T. The only other equivalent ever to the Model T was the original Volkswagen. Now they came out just before the Second World War, the first of those, and Volkswagen means people's car. And so Hitler was doing the same thing as the Ford Model T did, was to drop the price of a car right down so that the people's car, people could buy them. That's where the name of the Volkswagen came from. So, once again, mass market for the Model T and niche market for the Cadillac, which was expensive, and the Cadillac type of cars, for a while at least, tended to be made as one-offs. They wouldn't do a production line for them. So, when we are talking about market segmentation and putting it in the context of what we're doing with our marketing, This piece has 3 stages. First of all, to define the market segments, who you're going to sell it to. Target is your selection of segments that you're going to use. And positioning is getting yourself competitive and different from the other people in the segment you have chosen. So, I'll give you an example which will sort of introduce a bit what we're talking about. Any of you think that you're familiar with the little lambskins that you put babies on? I know that's quite dated now, but you could buy these little lambskins. They'd never been shorn, they had a beautiful feel to them, and you put your babies on them and they'd snuggle into them, and they didn't suffer from cold so much, and all sorts of things. The only thing was they immediately went face down into them, and not everybody likes that, but in our day you were encouraged to stick your baby's face down.
Yeah.
So anyhow, think now for a minute about, we're putting on the market a whole heap of these baby care lambskins, say. Now they are new, they're a new concept, and they obviously aren't going to quickly appeal to everybody for a start. But who is going to potentially buy them?
Grandparents.
Grandparents, definitely one, yeah? Who else, what other group might buy them?
Parents.
Parents. In which way would you lean? The female parent or the male parent?
Female.
Probably the female parent. So that we would therefore end up with 2 segments of, say, the total market for New Zealand. One segment being people of grandparenting age, a bit of a lean to females, and potential parents, again a bit of a lean to females. And so clearly the first challenge that the marketer of the baby care lambskins has is to say, hang on a minute, there's 2 pretty different segments here. So the things we might advertise that for these baby care lambskins for grandparents, that says something like, what a great idea, buy your new grandchild a baby care lambskin. They will be looking in different things and reading different magazines and potentially listening to different radio stations and so on than the parent market. Then you'll have to go and look into the parent market. So you can't just go bullet buy baby care lambskins. Now the other way you can distinguish this market, we'll look at a little bit more later, you cannot say that every parent and every grandparent is automatically going to buy one of these things. It's quite a leap of faith to stick your baby's face down on a baby care lambskin. No matter how much you think it should be good, you're uncertain. So it's a new product. Oh, hang on a minute, I wonder if this is going to be all right. And so you've got a bit of work to do, because a total market will tend to divide up into people that will give things a try and people who won't. And there's a slightly liberal sort of person tended to buy these lambskins. They were slightly pricey because you had to buy 2 of them. The minute you put your baby on one of them and had to go and wash it, then the babies would squirrel like cut cats, so you'd have to have another one to stick them on. The other thing about those was that you had parents had to be sure that they were safe from bacteria and all sorts of things like that, because in the end, of course, they wouldn't believe, I was a wee bit involved with these, and they wouldn't believe us when we said they'd been through the tanning process, and nothing can survive that, but they didn't really believe us. So in the end, we sent them up to the Tasman vaccine laboratory where all the medical dressings and whatnot are new, so they go through a nuclear thing. And so we could say there are absolutely no living things in those lambskins. So that's the sort of thing that happens. You get yourself some segments, you think about the segment, you think about whether it'll work, and you finally select 2 target segments. So for the baby care lambskin, you would probably be saying things like you just said. Largely female parent age, and very much grandparents, probably largely female, and probably you're thinking you want somebody a little bit liberal, prepared to try new things, so you've got to think about that a little bit. Some of them might be members of the Green Party, I don't know. And income. They were reasonably expensive, and so then you get some segments. Then you got to say, okay, well in the grandparent segment, what's the competitive offerings? For this particular thing, it was reasonably straightforward. There weren't many. But you could say, well wait a minute though, there sort of is a need for differentiation, because what you're really competing with is the grandparents buying a nice snow wrap or something like that, more conventional baby kit. So that's a 3-stage process. As usual, we end up in some definitions for these things. Process where markets are analysed and divided into groups with similar characteristics, needs and wants. Another definition, segmentation is division of market into groups which will respond differently to advertising, communications, promotions and other variables. Now with these jolly lambskins, we had no idea what to do really. So we thought we might do a bit of a sort of a random household survey in Christchurch. And the whole object of the exercise was to try and contact people that might have bought these things. And we couldn't figure out a way to do that until I hit on the idea, why don't we look find the period when the baby, when we thought, let's pick a period. There'd be a lot of babies born in November. Let's have a look down the birth notices. And when you do that, it's very easy. I was surprised how easy it was. You come to a name and to Betty and Jim Smith or something like that, the baby notice. Most of them are still living in the same house 6 months later than when the baby was born. The only ones that weren't, it was never very easy to sort out Smiths or anything like that. But you by and large you get it right. So you go around, you knock on the door and say, do you know anything about baby cares, lambskins? So a bit over half of them did. Where did you hear about them? And it was quite interesting. I'm exaggerating and I'm simplifying, but the main place they heard about them for the parent age group in the women were on the radio in the morning. They had the radio going while they went around doing whatever they're doing. And the grandparent was a Woman's Weekly. Surprise, surprise. There weren't so many new ideas and goodness knows what else is in those days either. So we were able to find out then, it was great, because then we could make a conclusion, right, well we don't need to muck around too much advertising in the newspapers, we'll just hit this radio stuff for the parents and we'll try and pick them up that way. And it was reasonably successful. Any company might choose to target any one or more than one segment. Doesn't mean you can't. I mean, we said there with these baby lambskins, we talked about 2, the grandparents and the parents. We might put an incredible amount of effort into sorting out, defining a segment, but we need to remember that the segment is defined in a moment of time. And so if your target is, for example, the parents having babies, before very long, those same people, they'll have moved from that phase, so that segment won't necessarily be there in the same way that it was. It'll probably be somewhere else. So in Christchurch, you might think you're very smart and you've contacted a whole heap of people in, say, the Bishopdale area of Christchurch, which was one where a whole lot of new houses and new babies were born. But of course, after a while, that's no longer the place where the babies have been born, or the moment, so you've got to go and find out where they are. So they're all over in Parklands and so on. You've got to watch that. So it changes over time. This is just a wee reminder, this PowerPoint slide is just ticking off a few strengths and limitations. Some of the strengths are it saves you incurring big costs trying to market to people that aren't going to buy it. That helps. It limits it a bit because you can't realistically, unless you're Coca-Cola or McDonald's, you can't realistically sell to everybody. Limitations are that in larger organisations, this business of working it all out can actually be quite expensive, and you've got to make sure you're going to get something out of it. So there's another little bit of jargon down the bottom here that comes straight out of textbooks. Market segments should be big enough, different enough, reachable, you can get at them, and likely to be interested in the benefits. This is just a page out of a textbook. I think your printouts will probably just about be big enough to read that, but it's not saying much differently than what we've been talking about. So, the first thing to sort out with segmentation is the basis which we are going to use. So-called classification variables. How you're going to classify all the different segments. What method are you going to use? So, this is quite a long list of the possibilities. The first way you might cut up a market is into geographic segments. So the smallest realistic geographic segment for most business organisations, mainly consumer ones, say, is probably a town the size of, say, Westport or Greymouth. Anything much less than that population is probably not going to be sufficient to support the activity of your business or organisation. Now, I know somebody's going to say soon, but hang on a minute, the internet changes all that. The answer is yes, it probably does, but if we are talking about things like locating businesses in different places and that type of thing, probably not going to want to be much more, much less than the size of somewhere like Westport. The next one is, so the geographic is actually the easiest one. You've got to find out where they are, that's potential markets. The next one is what we call demographic. Now this means to do with the people. in your handout there's a bit of information about this sort of thing, including for greymouth, it happens to be. What we're on about here, the main demographic ones are gender, age, occupation and income. Now, the New Zealand statistics data will give you fundamental demographic statistics like age and gender, give you a bit of a guide to gender. Occupations are generally gained from the electoral rolls. If you look in an electoral roll, you'll probably see your name in there, and unless you blocked it, it'll be what your occupation is. And income, you can get income data, but it's mainly in blocks. Now those are the sort of factual or relatively easily obtained information for one way of segmenting. So you can either do it geographically or demographically. If you want to combine geographic and demographic, that's not terribly hard to do, and it's another way of cutting up the cake. Now, almost the next, just about all of the next of the things on that list, it's much, much harder to pick up the information. So the first is what we call psychological or behavioural. Now, for that, read your last week's handout. This is the buyer behaviour stuff. So I won't go over that again. And the next one is psychographic or lifestyle segments. This is probably the one that is now getting the most attention because it seems to influence buyer behaviour and marketing more than the other things. And it is largely built on this notion that people's perceptions determine how they will buy. And the perceptions include how they see things and how they would like to be seen or see things. So every time you think about psychographic, think in terms of this. You might decide that people that play rugby would be a good segment. Part of their lifestyle. Give a bit of an idea of how many people play rugby. There's also a group that goes with that and what we could call the wannabes. People want to be identified with rugby even though they may not play it. They might go to the rugby club, they might wear rugby jerseys and rugby kit around the streets and all this sort of thing, the wannabe. And so you might also, the type of thing you might like to think about when you do this too is there would be a reasonable sort of niche market for people that go four-wheel driving with clubs or something like that, four-wheel drive trekking. Or on in the case of the bank, that could include a branding that everybody goes for, like KiwiSaver or something perhaps. It could include interest rates. It could include electronic whiz gigs that you can bank without even going in the door. But that's all related to the core product, which is really moving money in and moving money out. The final one, the big ring, is the so-called augmented products. Now I'll use the bank example again because you're probably fairly familiar with this. Think of the things that banks have that aren't directly related to moving money in and moving money out. For example, if you take a mortgage with them, they will very quickly try to sell you insurance, mortgage repayment insurance, or householders insurance, and that sort of thing. So they are augmenting their lending product with, in this case, some insurance product. And they also start to figure out what other things you might be doing with your money or your loan or whatever. And so they will start to do things like foreign money, like traveller's checks, like credit cards. So those are all augmented products. So, if you can read that through reasonably carefully and get your heads around the three levels, that would be very good, and read the examples they've given you, which aren't banking examples. So as part of the product, looking at the second page of your handout, getting to a product needs people and firms to be innovative. In other words, to be developing and introducing new and different options. Then we have the notion of sorting out what really service products are. So you could say that a restaurant was either a product, which is the food, and the food is being produced in the restaurant, or it is a service. You're going in there for the service, and the food is part of that. And so some of these things, sometimes they can be both. Now, there's quite a lot of argument at the around when you start thinking about sporting events and the Olympics. Now, some will say they've gone a long way from being a meeting of athletes in different sports, and that they are really now one great big product. And so the old provincial rugby has turned into the Super 15 or whatever it is now, and that is a product, and it really has a brand, even though it is actually a sort of a service spectacle, or on the other hand, it's a service available across the whole spectrum of rugby where people can actually join in the sport. And aligned with that sort of thing is branding is more and more used to add value on the one hand, so that people see a product or a service and immediately say, I have a favourable perception of that, I like that, it looks good to me, so I will buy that brand. And so if you go around, again I'll use a supermarket example because we all tend to go to supermarkets a bit, you will start to notice that the supermarkets have three sort of concepts of a brand. They have New World and they have Countdown, and they're trying to build an image in people's minds that they will have a favourable perception of New World and Countdown. And when you get inside the shop, then you're going to be buying things often according to the brand. And so some people will say, I like Kellogg's cornflakes, or I like Sanitarium cornflakes, or Cornies, I think they are. And so you click on with that. You say to yourself, well, I'm going for Kellogg, that's a good brand, or I'm going for Sanitarium because I like that brand. And then they start to do the added value. If you look at the cornflakes part of the supermarket, you actually have to look around for a long time to find just the cornflakes, nothing else. All the rest of the boxes have got all sorts of additives in them, cornflakes with this, cornflakes with that, which are actually quite a nuisance. But they're trying to build in this image that there's a lot of options for just the Kellogg brand. So, the final thing I'm probably going to do now is to use the example of Coca-Cola, which is potentially one of the best examples that one can find about applying the fundamentals of the marketing mix. And we'll start with the product, and I will give you a printout of the slides we'll use before working with that. Now the starting point for thinking about this is, and it's a superbly good example for a number of reasons, which I'll try and make clear. The starting point is this. Essentially, Coca-Cola is a drink. It is mainly water. It has quite a lot of sugar, and it has an additive in it to give it a particular taste. That's all it is. That's all it is. So everything else about Coca-Cola that's turned it into a household name and everything has been built up basically through this marketing mix. So let me just run the slides. So, the can of Coke. What I'm wanting to build up with you now is that building up from just essentially the water, the sugar and the additive and to some extent the colour, the product is something more than that, otherwise it wouldn't be so popular. And so these are the things we have to start to think about. There's a story about it. So it's been around for a while. It's arguably the world's most widely distributed product and is available in nearly 200 countries. I don't think, in fact I'm sure that Macca's and that don't get anywhere near that. Coca-Cola is just everywhere. Some say it's the most recognised word on earth, Coca-Cola. The other contender, apparently, I understand, is a little bit of argument about is Coca-Cola the most well-known English wording in the world, or is it okay? Is that the most well-known, well-used word? Big debate. The argument is that in any country in the world, people will know what you mean when you say okay. And the other half of the argument is, yeah, maybe if you go in the world and say Coca-Cola, they'll know exactly what you mean. The argument doesn't really matter. You just need to know it's very widespread. So, we will argue here that the Coca-Cola product, the thing that finally gets over to you, is the drink, the name, because naming is very vitally important when you're going to call a product something, and the bottle, in this case. Or the can, of course. In the original formula, 2 key ingredients. One came from the coca leaf from Africa, in South America, and the other was a cola nut. Now everybody says, and they're quite right, that this coca or COC leaf actually had a fair amount of cocaine in it, and that, because that's the sort of leaf. It probably did, but maybe not very much. All of a sudden we're turning this thing from sugar and water and a bit of colouring into something with a few more benefits too. So, this is what's in Coca-Cola now. Caffeine, cola nuts extract, coca leaves extract, vanilla, citric acid, lime juice, caramel and water. And it also has a secret flavouring, the famous secret 7X flavouring. Now this is what they don't tell you what it is. All the bottlers around the world buy in the 7X flavouring, but they don't know what it is. It's just this, and they're told to put that much in every litre of water or something. It is widely thought that it's a mixture of herbs and oils of orange, lemon, nutmeg, cinnamon, coriander and neroli, plus some alcohol. The formula is much the same today, but it doesn't have the extract from the coca leaves. That has been banned. So the main Coca-Cola company sells a syrup made from these things to bottlers all over the world. The bottling companies then add sugar and water to make the final drink. So it varies in countries whether it's a separately named company that bottles for Coca-Cola or whether it's a Coca-Cola owned bottling plant. It varies a little bit how they actually do it. So the syrup and the final drink are not expensive to make. For many years the cost of the syrup for each bottle was about 1.5 cents. So assuming that's a bit out of date, that means probably what was in a can of Coke, it costs somewhere around about 1 cent. And so what do you pay for a can of Coke? A couple of dollars I suppose now, do you? Something like that. It's more complex and there are more brands. As you know, Coca-Cola now has all sorts of other things. There's the lemony ones and there's the, what's Coke's lemonade? Sprite, I think it is, that's the Coke one. And so on. So, this is some of the things people think about it. And not tonight, but when we get round to the promotion P for Coca-Cola, you'll see how they ramp all this stuff up to encourage people about its benefits. What they don't say, that I think it's true, I don't know whether it's still true, but it used to be true, if you put little coins into a bottle of Coke before very long, there wouldn't be much coin left.
I think it's just that it gets clean.
Is it just that it gets cleaned, is it? Right,
It
yeah,
shines.
something like that, yeah. So to the name. The people that made the first Coca-Cola needed a good name. And a good name's hang of a tricky. I can recall when we started making bikes in New Zealand, we wanted a name for them and for the company. And there were so many. We had competition for school kids and all sorts of things. We had so many names. And one day there were just two of us sitting down having a drink, not of Coca-Cola, but we were having a drink. And it suddenly came to us, what do? We make bikes. Why don't we call the company Cycle Makers? And that's what we called it. But Coca-Cola, it's very true that the name Coca-Cola has been thoroughly studied because it's been so successful. Like if you think in terms of Coca-Cola with other soft drink names, the Coca-Cola itself, for some reason, appears to be a very good name. And there's been a couple of main reasons, two or three main reasons. Firstly, in the Coca-Cola company, they did like we did with Cycle Makers. What is it? What are the two main ingredients? Coca leaves and cola nuts. What should we call it? Coca-Cola. So they got that bit that way. Then they started to realise that the name was so-called alliterative. Now that means when the words of a phrase have the same capital letter sound, the same alphabetic letter sound. So they decided that when you talked it like this, Coca-Cola is sort of alliterative. There are a lot of other product names at the same time that did the same thing. Botanic Blood Balm. I shudder to think what that was, but Botanic Blood Balm is probably good for your blood. Or Copeland's Cholera Cure. So those are alliterative. They have the same first letter sound. Now further studies show, from asking people and trying to get to the bottom of this, that people think the name sort of sounds smooth and it sort of looks smooth. That the letters are reasonably rounded, not little wee sticks or anything like that. And they figured that people are saying that it is smooth and easy to say. So you can wander around home tonight saying over and over again, Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, think if you think it is smooth and easy to say. Just say it for yourself. That's what they found, that people thought about it. The two short words and the shape of the look of the name was seen to be very attractive. Then came the question of how are we going to package this thing? All very well to talk about making it. Until about 1900, they weren't bottling Coke. They sold it through soda fountains. And that there is a fairly, I hope that picture's visible, that is a soda fountain. You would go to one of these things in a milk bar or somewhere like that, and you would buy a glass of Coke. Now that picture's not accurate because the picture's a bit newer. you bought there's a glass there, you bought a glass of Coke that came out of the soda machine, which was filled up with the Coca-Cola. A more modern version of these, that was a similar soda fountain. So you put the glass in there, pull the lever down, squish, you got your glass of Coke, and that was how you got it. And they're still around. At about that time, the first bottles for almost everything looked like that. And I don't know whether any of you have ever bothered or got involved in doing this, but if you go around some of the old West Coast gold sites and go digging around where houses have been and so on, and every now and then you will get jars and bottles that you can get hold of. There's a surprising number of them actually look a bit like that. I've quite quickly found 2 or 3 at home just by almost tripping over them. So if they all look like that, what they needed was a bottle that everybody would recognise, that needed to look different, and that it was distinctive for some reason. So, this was their first bottle. Now they brought these back in. You can now get these little bottles of Coke. For a while you would have a very long walk to find one of those little bottles of Coke. But it has some quite interesting characteristics. They said it was good to hold. It had that bubble bit in the middle that meant the bottle just didn't slip out of your hand. And it looked something like a lady's dress style called the hobble skirt. Now there's a hobble skirt. So the Coca-Cola bottle does look a bit like that, take the arms off. And that drew attention to it. So, behind all this has been the putting together of a product that basically has a fundamental providing a refreshing drink, but has all these other characteristics that go to form people's perceptions about Coca-Cola. So it's the drink, the bottle, the name. So, next week I will, next week I will at least talk to you about product development and again use the use the example of Coca-Cola. They had, I'll give you a bit more detail about it, but they had one notable success from developing up Coca-Cola and one notable failure. So they didn't do everything right. The notable success was Diet Coke and the notable failure was New Coke. But I can tell you a bit more about that probably next week. That's where we'll head with that. And then move on to the other big thing for Coca-Cola is how they promoted all this to get these perceptions out build these perceptions out in their customers' minds. Right, so I think I can safely say I now have all the first marketing assignments, nearly the first, getting close. And most of you are working on the second one. Are there any issues at the moment? Talked to a couple of you so far about it. Anything else? You finished it yet, Rafika?
No, I haven't finished it.
You haven't started it?
Yeah.
That's good. Cheryl, you're going to be working away on that?
Yep.
You're all right with the second assignment, Ethan? You were well on the way with that, weren't you?
Yeah, no, so when do we get the third one?
When are you going to get the third one?
Yeah.
When you finish the second one. No, I'll get that one to you about when we finish this marketing mix. Possibly next week, but certainly the week after. Do you want to get on with it? Do you want to get on with it, do you?
Yeah, I'm going to start getting into it, so I'll finish that second one.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll get it up to you. If I don't do that in a day or two, send me an email to remind me.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I've just got to tinker it up yet, but that won't take long.
Yeah, no, it's cool. And I'll send you through the this assignment.
Yes.
The second one.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, that works. Now, you're still on your lonesome there, aren't you?
Yeah.
No, that's all right. Well, I've recorded this for Ashley and Marcel. That'll be okay.
Alright.
All righty. Well, thanks for coming in, guys. And
How many
Thank you.
assessments are there for this?
I'm sorry.
Are there 4 assessments for this?
There's sort of are, but I'm going to. What I've done the last couple of times, and I'll do it this time. I'm going to tack on a little assessment on the back of the number 3 one. It's only very short.
Okay, so that would be basically the last one.
Yes.
Once we've
Yes.
done the assessment.
Yes. See ya. See ya.
Okay. Thank you, Ian.
Welcome. Get the big cam off. Then we can reflect that you can get some real micro segments. And towards the back of your handout, there is an example of the radio segments on the West Coast. Keep going by. Yeah, right, the very back page. Now, if you are talking about New Zealand, the top half of that page gives us the market shares of all the different radio stations. Now, some of you probably know, but I didn't until I eventually found out, that those radio stations tend to group up into 2 or 3 stations all in the same group. And I was actually in Dunedin or something one time having a look at these, I don't know why, but I was, and sometimes they're all in the same building and in the same computer. They just, solid gold will come out of that computer, and I don't know, what's the other one? Such and such an FM will come out of that computer. It's amazing. The other thing they did, which I don't know how they do this, I'm blowed if I could do it. So supposing let me find the one I saw. More FM, that's the one I saw. That's a reasonable market share. Anyhow, More FM, the guy was sitting in front of the computer, babbling away, just like they do on the radio, and then playing some music, and that was loaded into. All of this was being loaded into the computer. He was pre-recording the whole thing. And so at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, the button might have been pressed and it was off. Away it went. Mind blown. I couldn't believe it. He did say you had to be quite careful. And you can imagine it. I said, well, how do you get the weather forecast? Well, the computer just plugs that in and puts it there. And he said, but you do have to be careful because you could be sitting here this afternoon leveling away into the computer and quite unwittingly say something like, oh, it's a lovely sunny day in Dunedin today, and it is when you're looking out the window, but tomorrow at 2 o'clock when they're listening to that is bursting down with rain. And so there's a bit of an art in it apparently. So the old radios are all computerised. And even I couldn't believe this, but I've still got some difficulty believing that all of those West Coast ones that you can hear. I suppose you can, Radio Pacific, Radio Trackside, that's on the radios, isn't it? Radio Sport, Classic Hits, oh yeah, maybe. So that's micro stuff. The market for radio is clearly micro. If you look down that one above for the New Zealand shares, the biggie there, big E's, are the Radio New Zealand National Programme down the bottom at 15, and the News Talk ZB at 12. Interesting that in the UK, BBC Radio 4 has 22% listenership. It's very high, considering how many radio stations they've got. So if you're a person that's going to communicate by radio, I'm not sure where you would start on that list. I mean, you're not going to put it all on all of them. Somehow or another, you are going to need to, for radio, try and sort out which of those options are most likely to be heard by the segment you want. So the grandparents probably wouldn't have even heard of Solid Gold or something like that. They may be national radio listeners, or they may be News Talks, probably. Anyhow, that's the challenge. So, folks, that is dangerously close to the end of that bit. I'm not going to go past the segmentation bit tonight. I will move from there to those next stages, the targeting and the positioning. That will be the second part of that. So, reflecting for a moment on your assessment, your assessment will cover what we did last week, what we've done tonight, and finally what we will complete next week.
And is there one more after that?
I think you said there was 3 this week.
Yes, I think I did. I think it's 3, or it might be 3 and a wee bit tacked on the end of it. I'm just not quite sure. I think I remember making an adjustment to cover all the learning outcomes, so just to be jargony about it. But yes.
But this is due on the 15th of September.
Yep.
So the last one must be quite big. September.
Yes.
This finishes in December, doesn't it?
No, this will finish early November.
Early November. Oh, yeah, right. Roger.
The next one's essentially getting you to build a marketing plan for something. It's not that difficult. Once you get...
Sounds very difficult.
Oh no, you'll be right.
Keep saying no.
Can you just point out where the temporal thing
Can't you hide it?
is? Is it like a write-up?
You might be able to get away with it,
Because it's the one that I'm going to have struggle with. Because I always overthink those questions.
Righto, it may very well not be in here, but I can't find it either.
No.
So, to avoid me forgetting, when you send me an email and say temporal, and Ashley's going to send me an email to talk about the temporal statement, which the assessment's asking you about, which isn't in your handout, so I'll get it to you.
Yeah, emails.
Yep.
Sweet.
Ian,
Yes.
can I ask a question?
Of course.
In your assessment, question E, what do you mean in the brackets 2 times 0.5 for demographic, geographic and psychographic 2 times 1? What do you mean? What
2 times 0.5 means 2 times 0.5 of a mark.
Oh, okay, right. Oh, yes.
Okay?
I thought I missed something.
No. it's just a little bit of a guide to you
Okay.
for how that thing sits.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
That's good.